Okay, so
Okay.
I'd love to welcome Janet from Amphibian and Reptile Conservation Trust today. And Janet is going to give us an introduction to amphibian ID and ecology. So over to you, Janet.
Hi everyone. I am not used to Zoom. Can tell. I'm Janet. I am the education officer for Ark Trust in Scotland, otherwise known as the SARS project, Saving Scotland's Amphibians and Reptiles. But I used to just say Ark Trust in Scotland because that what I do is on 3.5 days a week is I go to schools and community groups and do surveying and get people excited about amphibians and reptiles. I do training, I go do workshops, I do talks live and like this. I give advice about ponds that need help, making ponds, wetlands, work with community groups, give advice about funding, work with farmers and landowners about amphibians and reptiles on their sites, growers, etc. Basically anything you can think about that is possibly amphibian and reptile and saving them, making people excited about them. That's what I do. So I'm here to give you a little bit of an intro into these amazing animals that we have in Scotland and a little bit about their ecology. So what am I covering today? We have our neighbourhood and we have three Scottish species, otherwise poshly known as anurans. And we have our native newts, the Urodales, and we have three species of those in Scotland as well. We will be looking at their basic ecology, where they are, how they live, their interactions, what do they like to eat for breakfast. And also, we'll also cover eggs, spawn, tadpoles, metamorphs, that kind of thing. The whole beauty of metamorphosis. So, let's begin with the common frog, Rana temporaria. Beautiful Latin name, temporaria, coming from the mythology that frogs appeared magic and then disappeared magically in autumn and winter. And that's why they're called temporaria. Frogs, quite easy to identify, something that we all beloved as children, because most of us have chased them around the garden. And they have this beautiful, smooth skin. They are athletic. We have all seen them jump, and this is because of those gorgeous back legs. And let's have a look at them. That bandit stripe across their eyes is a great indicator that you have a frog. So they also have a dark patch behind their ear with their tympanum. It's quite big, as you can see. They are very sensitive to sound in two ways. They can hear it, like we can, through their legs, because they have this amazing muscle that connects the top of their scapula to their actual ear, their internal ear. So they can hear vibration as sound. Now that is wonderful. What else? Oh, those legs. Look at them. They are elongated. They have they're just the femur tibialis are just elongated bones. The foot is also elongated and it's just sort of like bent up on itself, like this amazing spring. But added to the fact is also their hip is also hinged on their basal vertebra. So they actually have this amazing mechanism where they're kind of like all bent up like a spring and then released. And that's the jump that you can see. They are incredibly elegant jumpers, but they are smooth. They are very good to eat, hence the necessity of having the mechanism to be able to evade predators. Because all they've got going for them is the fact that they can jump away because frogs taste good. Now, they are not commonly green. They are not Kermit. They come in all kinds of shapes and colors. Classically, it is that sort of like olive green with a bit of stripiness, but you can get these patchy looking ones. You can get very pale looking ones. You can get red. As you can see, there's a whole variety. And in art, often we are asked, is this a non-native invasive? Is this a tropical frog in my garden? And then we go, no, common frog. They're there to surprise us in all of their shapes and forms. And also the other thing is that they have chromatophores in their skin, can actually change color of background. Again, camouflage, being able to match your background, a great way for evading prey. But the key giveaway, that bandit stripe across the eyes. They do look like Zorro, which is just a beautiful thing about frogs. Frog habitat. This is classic. I think this might be John's garden, which is this beautiful pond. This is classic for them. This is what they want, because obviously as amphibians, they've got to go back to water to breed. So what are they looking for? They're looking for submerged and emergent plants. They're looking for shallow banks to get in and out of. They're looking for places to hide in when they're out of the water. Can you see all the pots and the log piles? It's perfect. But also, they do not want fish. Have I mentioned they're tasty? So they're tadpole, tasty. Fish, no, they do not want to live with fish. So they do not want with fishing. And that is a classic thing that frogs demand in terms of their breeding habitat. No fish. Also, ducks. Ducks can be a problem as well. Waterfowl, because waterfowl, have I said this? Frogs are tasty. So, but there's confusion with the common frog world, because this is one of my most favourite ponds in the east of Glasgow, which is near Palmate. That wonderful structure you can see at the back is the Palmate Recycling Centre. So it's quite an urban kind of industrial landscape, but this amazing huge suds pond, urban drainage scheme, usually put in with new housing developments to collect runoff water. One has just alive with frogs in the breeding season, so much frog spawn, so froglets jumping about in that come out of it. And you can see there's a swarm. It's alive with waterfowl. There are fish. And this is a pond that goes against the rules. And I'm going to say to you, I'm going to be honest, for a lot of my life, they're always out to surprise us. So even if you read the books, they don't always follow the rules. Right, we're coming up to crazy seeing madness. Already here in the Highlands, we have got ponds full of males right at the moment. They get there early, and they are really early this year. We have records of frogs already in Highlands at the beginning of February, and it's been cold. So again, they're not reading the rule book. It should be average air temperatures get above 5 degrees C, which they haven't. And the frogs have been out. They've been croaking. They've been saying to the females, come on, here we are. And this is what we get. We get this boiling of our waters, like sort of like 2 weeks later, to see what the males are doing. And, you know, if there's anything there worth their regard. And then we just get ponds full of frog spawn, this mass of just life in our ponds. And it's happening now. It is horribly early this year. Right, then they are croaking away most of the night, keeping a friend of mine down the road up actually, and the season is usually February, March. If we get a cold snap, then those frogs who turn up late have got the advantage. Last year we had a cold snap, so those frogs who turned up later had the advantage in that their spawn actually did survive. They did have tadpoles. So it swings around about in the frog's world as to get there early. Do you have an advantage? Get there late? Is that the advantage? That is the nature of life itself. Right, going on to the common toad, buffo. Look at this fantastic and magnificent beastie. Warty, I mean, you know, just so, you know, so extra there. Again, the sort of like the coloration of golds and oranges and speckles. That fantastic eye, the copper eye. And then behind it, this sort of like black banding, which is a parotoid gland, which is that copper eye. There's that parotoid gland, which are noxious substances, because toads, unlike frogs, are not tasty. In fact, they're disgusting. Now, a puppy that we had many years ago thought it'd be brilliant to try and, you know, try a toad, and it regretted it instantly because they are disgusting. As I say to the children when I take them out, I say, never lick a toad, not advisable. They are horrible. Some animals have sort of like caught onto the fact that toads is disgust, produce this noxious, disgusting substance, but it doesn't harm anyone long term. So if you do pick up a toad, you're not going to poison yourself. But quite a few animals, like crows, our hooded crows are brilliant at this. Our otters have worked this out. Flip a toad over, tear out its belly, you can avoid all of the nasty noxiousness. And quite common it is to find toads that have been basically just half a toad. And quite a few locks that we go around will find splashes of silver where the oviduct has been left, because that is quite disgusting, and it leaves these splashes of silver around the lock, and otters are usually guilty of that. So it's a good indicator of otter activity. One thing I will say here, though, if you ever get in a situation where perhaps you're rescuing an amphibian, it's always best to make sure your hands are cold and wet, because especially if the frogs, the newts, which have smooth skins, our skin is warm and dry, and it's enough to burn their skin and cause them harm. So I never pick any amphibian up unless I've made sure my hands are at least very cold or very wet, at least, you know. Now, going on, toad habitats, different from frogs. We can get toads setting up home in the garden pond. It's rare. They like a bigger expanse of water. They usually are found in lochs and lochans, deeper, bigger ponds. They can cope with fish because they don't taste nice. Even their tadpoles do not taste nice. So again, they can evade fish. They are looking for emergent weeds for their toad spawn, which we're going to go on in a minute. And this is classically their habitat. They are the kings of water. Now, another thing that you can find about toads is that they have these nuptial pads on their front legs in breeding season on the males. And that's because toads will grip onto the female. Frogs do as well. Their nuptial pads aren't as developed. But toads really go for it when they grip onto the back of the female and they are holding on for dear life. This is technically called amplexus, where the toads are holding on, waiting to release the sperm as the female releases her eggs. And toads can be male toads can be very sort of like insistent in amplexus, because it's quite common to see more than one male toad holding onto a female, creating what we call a toad ball. Sometimes this can be quite distressing in breeding season, because you'll see a female who's just basically just been mobbed by loads and loads of toads. The male toad will give a bit of a squeak for if another male toad is on it to go, hold on, you're not holding onto a female. It does generally work its way out. It is pleasingly quite rare for female toads, you know, not to be killed by this, by drowning. But basically, it is toads are just so, male toads are so determined. You will find toads, female toads, actually being waylaid by a male toad, and she carries him to her breeding pool, even if it's not the male's pool, because they do like to go back to their original pool. So males will often end up in the female's breeding pool because they've managed to get into amplexus early. Right, and that's just going straight onto that nuptial pad. Can you just see that thickening there on the front leg? Right, Natterjacks. Now, I'm very sad that the fact that I have to say to you, if you're going to stand a chance of seeing a Natterjack in Scotland, you've got to head down to the Solway Firth, because these guys are rare. They are so rare, and one of the places for them is on the Solway. They are so protected under UK regulation. They are defined, it's quite obvious when you see them. They have this amazing yellow stripe going down their back. Their eyes are different again, with that yellowish greenish tinge, quite beautiful. And the coloration, as you can see, is just different from the common toad. And look at that gorgeous eye. They are beautiful. They are gorgeous creatures. It is so bad that they're restricted to a certain environment. Another defining feature of the Natterjack is that they are our only UK Northern to have a single vocal sac. You know, everyone else has got two to the side, not the Natterjack. It's just a big bulbous vocal sac. And why, why the big bulbous vocal sac, double or single? And it's because it's a resonator. It's an amazing resonator for sound, like a drum. And I'm going to play you a bit of that now. Can everyone hear that? Isn't that just a wonderful and captivating sound? If you're down at the Solway and get a chance to hear that, what a treat. So I'm going to make you think now, because there's records of the Natterjack dating from like the 1700s. And there's a street in London, it's called Paddock Street, which was named after the fact that Natterjacks were seen commonly just walking down the streets of London. These used to be common in the UK. They were not restricted to a specific habitat. And sadly, they are today. They are on the fringes. And if we look at the habitat that they're in, classically of the Solway, it's sand dunes, because these little guys are burrows. They like to escape from hot sunny days, but burrowing in damp land. They love salty meres. They are relatively saline tolerant. And they love heavily grazed, open salt grasslands. So these are now restricted to these very specific habitats, which are now protected to save the Natterjack. But we're going on to spawn. I did promise you spawn, and here it is. And we've got two very different types. Frog spawn is always laid in clumps. About 2,000 eggs a female will produce, and a female will choose the shallowest and sunniest part of the pond. It's great for enhancing development quite rapid. Frog spawn is related to temperature. You don't want anything too hot, that kills it. Anything too cold will restrict development, slow it down, put it at more risk of being predated on or coming out later in the season and then being predated on. So the ideal spot is key. But you will find that once a female frog has laid in a specific perfect location, this actually attracts other female frogs to lay in a perfect location. Frog female feet are sensitive to the touch of other frog spawn. So actually they will pick up on that. That stimulates the instinct of actually depositing frog spawn, is the fact that there is somewhere that other frogs have been, which is why you'll see big clumps or mats of it rather than it being dispersed in various places. There is an advantage to being the female who lays in the middle. So they'll normally try and lay on top of other frog spawn. It's like a huge pedal scheme that just collapses in the middle if you watch it happening, because of this stimulation of going where others have been. So there is a disadvantage if they get pushed out to the edge, because that's a bit that will be nibbled at by predators and will also have more of a cooling and warming effect due to just daily temperatures. Now, toads have frog spawn, that's toad spawn, that is laid in strings, and it's a double string from both down, producing a double stringed effect, and then the female will lovingly twist around the plant, sort of like, it looks like a garland in the end, and that's something to look out for. A string has about 1,500. So there are these very classic differences, though you can't mistake one set of spawn from the other. Just briefly to say, if you do get a chance to see it, only lay their one single string. Now, going on to the tadpoles. So, telling them apart can be a challenge. When they first emerge, they're just both frog and toad look like commas, okay? So very difficult to tell apart. As they develop, color differentiation happens, and you will see that the frog is that lovely dappled one. You hold it up, if you get a little sort of like jar, and you get a chance to look at frog tadpoles close up, you see it's like they're covered in little sequins. They're sort of dappled and very pretty to look at. Toad tadpoles, on the other hand, stay black. They just do. They have slightly different behaviors as well, in that frog tadpoles are a little bit more skittish because they're terrified of being eaten, because they're delicious. Whereas toad tadpoles, a little bit more in your face, you know, a little bit more sort of like going around, a bit more challenging. I have had folks say to me that if you put your finger in the water, a toad tadpole is more likely to come up and investigate it, whereas a frog tadpole will go away. I don't know any scientific papers that will justify that. That's just a bit of folklore out there, but you know, you can give it a go and let me know. But anyway, so those obvious differences between tadpoles are there to see, which is a nice difference. They then go on to create these beautiful little metamorphs as they go for metamorphosis. So tadpoles will their back leather under their internal gills. You can see them, you're sort of like they're sort of there, but they emerge last. And then these beautiful little metamorphs come out when they've absorbed that tail back into them, and they're just little perfect replicas of the adults. The frog ones have the smooth skin, the toads are a bit more warty. You can see little tiny parotoid glands just behind their eyes there. And they come out of the water and they're desperate to survive, because at this point, they're both susceptible to predation. Got a bit of a game for you here. Where's Froggy? Because I go onto one site, which is just, oh, you go on and you just think it's rocks. And then you look past all of the rocks and pebbles, and it is alive, absolutely alive with little froglets. And you're terrified that you may have been just sort of like treading across all of these little tiny froglets. So giving you a beat there to find Froggy. Okay, ready? There he is, hiding there. Isn't that perfect? Beauty of, we had more time. There's actually about 6 of them in there, but it takes a while to find them. But if you now there and you've got your eye in, they start popping out at you, and you can find little froglets who are desperate to survive, because everything is out now trying to get them, trying to get a few froglets, and the survival rate is just awful. You're lucky if about 1% of them survive to adulthood, really. On to the newts, my personal favorite, the Palmate. I adore these guys. They are so tough. I mean, they are really tough. The places I have found them, you would not believe. Let's get on to their eye here. The Palmate newts, these are small newts. This one gets, depending on where they are and how harsh their life is, it's quite often I've found adults about 5 centimeters long. They have a ridge down their back, which is, it's not big, it's not huge, but it's enough on a male. This is the males I'm talking, to have these ridges. They have a tail filament. We're not sure what the tail filament does, but the males have this tail filament. We're not sure again if that's something to do with the production of pheromones, because for newts, it's all about producing pheromones for the males to attract the females. They also dance. So all of the newts have a mating dance. It's sort of like a bit of a tail wiggle and enticing the female across to where the male then deposits a spermatophore, which is stuck to the ground on a little stalk, and then comes across, and then she basically absorbs that spermatophore into a cloaca, which then is ready when she needs to fertilize her eggs. So there's a lot going on there in newt breeding life. And again, how they get their name of palmates is this amazing webbed hind feet in the males. They look like they're wearing oven gloves. Oh, right. Before I could press, don't know why, the smooth newt, the male. Can you see? This has got a big fancy back crest, which is just amazing. They have a very, very bright belly. They're more spotted, and they also have frilly back feet, not like an oven glove, just kind of like with little frills on them. They also have a bit of a splash of color on their tail. Can you see blue and orange? Which just is enough, again, that mating dance, I guess, to the females, sort of like gives a definite come hither vibe. So smooth newt male. Right, the small newts with palmate females, very difficult to tell apart. Really tell apart if you just see them. They look so similar, but there is a trick. So this you can see spotty throat, orange and spotty underside, and plain pink throat, straw colored underside with few or no spots. One is the smooth, which is spotty. One is the palmate, which is pink and plain. So when you're stuck trying to identify them, again, cold, wet hands, you have to pick them, identify. I usually try and encourage people to have little magnispector boxes so they can look underneath, because that's usually just good enough to limit the amount of time that you're touching them, to see the difference between palmate and smooth newt females. Right, now going on about where you find newts. It can be a huge variety of places, especially for palmates. This is one of the ponds I go to that has one of the best records for palmates. I'll go there any one time and I can pull out up to for 70. That's adults, that's even counting the efts that might be there. Eft means the larvae of small of newts and some great crested newts. And eft is just a beautiful word, but technically the larvae. Is at Broadford Primary, one of our first Amphibian schools, which is our citizen science project in Scotland, specifically for school resources to support that. So this is a very small pond, and I say it can be just heaving with palmate newts. The main thing is the environment of lots of places for adults to hide. They don't have to travel far. It's full of nice invertebrates for them to feed on. And the pond is just, again, brilliant in terms of it's got emergence. It's got places that the larvae can feed. And it's a protected site, it's clean, and it's not. But palmate newts can always surprise you. This is from a project that was on the coast of Lacouche up here in the Highlands, where we found an established palmate newt population in saline conditions. Not extremely saline, but during storm conditions, sometimes these ponds were just at really high salinities. So they were dealing with very variable conditions where the rock pools sometimes dried out, conditions where the rock pools were inundated with seawater, and they survived and were established. They had a different behavior in terms of their mating dance wasn't in just clear water or the base of the pond. The males were enticing males into cracks and crevices in the side of the rock pools. So very different again of palmate newts on the coast, not just only in Lacouche, but by the coast of Loch Linnhe and on the Isle of Mull. It'll be interesting to know exactly how far they are. But palmate newts, like smooth newts, once they get on out of breeding condition, they're out of the water, they are dependent on living on the land. Now, these are some palmate in a garden, they were living under a bucket, and their texture changes. They are no longer just sort of like damp skinned and shiny. They actually they actually have a skin that's kind of dry, feels more like velvet. Their variety changes, as you can see. We've got darks, yellows. These are juveniles that are just, next to a woodlouse. They're probably just that sort of like latents, and they are just beautiful creatures, but can confuse you. And when I was out with a group looking at these newts, people were saying, "Oh, look, a lizard," and you couldn't blame them for that because they did look very lizard-like. Now, going on to a great favourite, the great crested newt. Again, horribly rare, especially in Scotland. You can see that the difference is they are bigger. You know, they get to about 15 centimeters. When I was out saving a population of great crested newts, just picking them up and having them drip over your hands because they're big, you know, you can feel the weight of them. Very different. So it's difficult to confuse with the smoothness because it does have that crest, it does have that sort of, yeah, but these are warty. Another name for them is the warty newt. So their skin has a greater sort of like rougher texture. This is the male who has a broken jagged crest. The tail has that silver blue flashes on it. And this is the female, again, warty, has sort of, again, will have that sort of a very rich yellow and black belly, and has stripy yellow, classic to look for if it has. Again, the female has a yellow stripe on the underside of the tail. The female is a bit male. You will find this with amphibians. Female classically being bigger than the male. The female has to have all the energy for producing the eggs. That's why she's bigger. And see, this one classically shows you that beautiful, fantastically, can't be mistaken, yellow and black blotchy underside. And again, these wonderful yellow and black fingers. So habitat wise, with the great crested newt, this is from a GCN training session. The great crested newt is protected like the Natterjack. You have to have a license to be able to survey or investigate crested newt or the Natterjack. So I do go out and do GCN training, as does John. Once trained, you go under a Natterjack license to be able to survey and look for GCNs. This is a particular habitat that should be ideal for them. Big water bodies, lots of emergent vegetation. They can cope with being fish because, again, they have a warty skin that produces enough stuff that makes them not good to taste, although heavens, classically, I've seen, love to scoop them up. They like sort of like a woodland fringe habitat because they do like to go out and find things to hide under as adults. So this is perfect habitat for your great newt. pH wise, they like anything that's above 6, quite neutral, as does the smooth newt. Going back to the Palmate, my favorite, why it's so tough. It can cope with acidic water, which is much the Highland newt. A lot of our water is very acidic because we're on peat. But Palmates seem to be able to cope with a variety of conditions, even some polluted conditions, and the Palmate can still survive. It is tough. It is tougher than the smooth. It's definitely tougher than the great crested newt. Right, going on to the newt eggs. Well, newts do not lay huge amounts of frog spawn. They, the female, will lovingly put each individual egg into a leaf and then fold it over, or into a large reed-like leaf and then fold it over in little zigzags, just deftly folding the leaves over with her back legs. This again is why emergent vegetation is so important, because for newts, they've got to lay their eggs. They'll lay about 200 individually. And I just want you to imagine doing something like that with your bare feet tonight, just to see how adept the female newt is and how dedicated. What an amazing mother. Now, if you find eggs, if you do unfold a bit of leaf vegetation to look for eggs, if it is pearly white, that is grey crested. And then if you do find something like that, please let Natterjack and us know, because again, we need to be able to protect that site. And if it's brown, that is your small newts, smooth and palmate. So again, if you do find, you do a little bit of a fold it back up, put it where it was. Can I just say about palmates again? Of course, there was no emergent vegetation. There was none. And we found that the Palmate newt females were actually laying their eggs and folding them in detritus, bits of dead and decaying matter, or laying them straight into the silt itself, which palmate newts can do, but classically will favour the leaf folding. On the coast, again, the behaviour just a bit different. So, unearthed, the larvae. This gorge feature is the grey crested newt. Kind of like has a bit of a hook to it, you know, it's sort of like in the middle. Its tail comes bit. And these, I think the thing that really tells for me are the wonderful and elegant bowing of the gills, the external gills, that golden iris. And again, they still have those black and yellow stripy toes and very long, elegant black and yellow stripy toes. Whereas the small newt, and I'm not going to go there. When it comes to small newts, telling them apart, practically very, very, very difficult to do in the field. They smooth and palmate will look like this. They do not have that sort of like elegant bowing of the body. They have very feathery gills, and the tail is not quite as elongated. Right, I do have to mention, I didn't say at the beginning, this is a bit of a surprise showing, the alpine newt, non-native invasive. How did it get here? Pet shops, eBay, garden centres. People can keep these elegant and gorgeous creatures as pets, put them into them, sort of like as you would for koi carp. Problem is, these guys get up and walk. So they are around specifically for sites for me in Edinburgh, which causes me huge problems when it comes to surveying, because by the letter of the law in Scotland, if you catch one of these, you're supposed to humanely kill it or make sure it ends up in captivity. It cannot be re-released. So again, this causes huge problems when it comes to surveying. But look how pretty they are. Now, I've seen these in Europe where they abound, where they are, that's their native territory, and they're such a great find, and we're thrilled to see them. I am not thrilled to see them when I'm surveying here. Main problem with these guys is they carry chytrid, which is a fungus. I know John's going to mention it, which is affecting our native populations. And our frogs and our newts are very susceptible to this. And yet these creatures are so pretty. They have this amazing yellow underside on the females and the more orange on the males, this beautiful mottled pattern. The male has this fantastic little stripy dorsal crescent, lots of black spots and blue. I mean, the blue is vivid, it's iridescent, it's gorgeous. And oh gosh, the male's so pretty, very vivid orange underside, which is why people like them as pets. But which is why it's so sad to catch them out in the wild, because you look at them, they are lovely, but we really don't want to catch them in the wild. And this is their larvae, because you're probably saying, well, how do I know if I've got them, if I'm getting a larvae? And it's difficult to say, but the trick is their tail is more blunt at the back. Can you see that? So there's slight differences, but tells if you do get an alpine newt larvae. Right, part of my job is be able to help people, because to succession, a pond does not stay a pond. It will be invaded, lots of vegetation, it will become silted up. Eventually, it will turn into fen and carve of trees, a woodland. In the end, it is never a pond. So you are always managing a pond for wildlife. So that's a lot of my time. And this was a pond I was working with, which was great for frogs, but it was losing open water. So we had to go in there and take out a lot of vegetation and desilt it to get it back into correct condition for a frog population. Another part of my job is advising about making new ponds and new wetlands. Some of these projects can be quite big. And a lot of it is about, will this site hold water, especially as we go through climate change? We've got to think about the hydrology of the site, the future hydrology of the site, you know, will this be a still open water pond in the long term that will not dry out? And then shaping a pond so that they can safely get in and out. Is there adequate cover around connectivity? Is this associated with other ponds within, say, 500 meters, where a population of amphibian newts could actually naturally get to this pond? Be aware of surprises. Always. I've told you what the rules are. The rules are always going to be broken. For example, one site with the wee kitty and yellow wellies, it was basically just a very shallow ditch, and it was full of frogs, absolutely full of frogs wanting to spawn. And yet the water was flowing, especially their frog spawn, because it's just washed downstream. But they were doing it, and they were finding little places where they could actually break the rule of laying their spawn all together, but trying to find places that were still to actually have their spawn laid. So that was a day. The other one, well, that, as you can see, is a concrete bunker. It's an old gun mounting from the Second World War that filled regularly with water. And this was regularly used for Palmate newts, who somehow, we still don't know, sheer wall of concrete to drop into the depth of water to basically breed. Then the adults somehow successfully got out of this deep pit of water, left their eggs to develop. And this was a stable breeding pond for years that we used to survey, until one very harsh winter where the water froze, broke apart the gun placement. So that spring when we went back to survey, the newts were still there breeding or trying to breed. It was a very hot spring post this very bad winter, and they were dying. They were dying, going to where they'd always gone to breed, and yet in water there was nowhere for them to escape from the scorching sun on this hillside, and they were still determined. So that was a rescue job. We had buckets and buckets and buckets of Palmate newts they were taking to a pond that was within the 5 kilometers, because you can't go over 5 kilometers because of restrictions of keeping population from chytrid and other diseases. John will mention all of this. And tried to save as many of those newts as we possibly could. That was a day's work. But I think I've gone on for too long. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for putting up with where I've made mistakes. Sorry about that, not used to Zoom. And I'm going to pass you on to John and his vast and wonderful knowledge of these fascinating and beautiful creatures.